Hi, I'm Femi OK, and you're in the stream. Today in Hong Kong, have anti-government protests taking a turn for the worse? We will discuss the controversy surrounding a proposed extradition bill and the movement it helped spark. And you can also join in that conversation. We are live on Twitter or on our YouTube chat. That was all happening as Hong Kong marked the 22nd anniversary of its handover from British to Chinese rule. Anger over a proposed extradition bill reached a new high as protesters broke into the city's Legislative Council chambers on Monday. Demonstrators occupied the building for several hours, leaving graffiti on its walls and defacing portraits of the city's political leaders. The incident marks a new phase in the movement, where weeks of mostly peaceful marches have drawn more than 1 million people to the streets. The bill in question would allow Hong Kong criminal suspects to be tried for crimes in mainland China. Protesters view the proposal as a threat to the one country, two systems principle that allows the city to have an independent judiciary and greater civil liberties. Hong Kong's leader, Carrie Lam, said that she will let the bill expire, but stop short of demands to scrap it entirely. So with us to talk about these issues in Hong Kong, pro-democracy activist Joshua Wong, Nixie Lam, a district councillor and member of the Democratic Alliance for Betterment and Progress of Hong Kong, and also Al Jazeera correspondent Andrew Thomas, who's been covering the protest this week from Hong Kong. Good to have you with us, everybody. I am going to start with an op-ed piece from China's Global Times. I'm looking at the op-ed now. I'm going to just show you a little sense of how angry the China Global Times actually were. So I'm going to read it for you. We're just going to put it up on the screen so then you can see it. And they said about the protests, and let's go to that control room so you can see it. This brand of arrogance that has challenged Hong Kong's rule of law must strongly be condemned. The city should not be turned into a haven for violence. Using violence to hijack a society like Hong Kong's is the greatest evil of the modern era. Joshua, when you see that response to the protesting, what's your response back?
Hong Kong people believe in rule of law, and Beijing believe in rule by law. And with the suppression of Beijing towards Hong Kong, eroded the one country, two system to be one country, one and a half system. People in Hong Kong might be extradited to China, the place without fair trial and rule of law. It just shows that how Beijing ignored the voice of people when 2 out of 7 million people took to the street and urged government accept the request to terminate the bill immediately. The leader of Hong Kong, Carrie Lam, said that, we will pause the legislation process with the suspension, but the bill will not terminate it immediately, and the bill will just terminate it 12 months later, which just ignore the voice of people, result in the discontents of Hong Kongers.
Nixie, your constituents, they're watching this, they're following this story as it unfolds in Hong Kong. If you could kind of poll them, what do you think they would say about what happened on Monday?
Well, what happened on Monday is really sad. I mean, like, when you're looking at the amount of violence we're using, I mean, if you put that in an international context, it might be not too violent because they're only breaking in a building and stuff. But and then if you look at what Hong Kong's always been, that amount of violence is never seen before. And we are still a Chinese-oriented sort of like a city. So we have this respect ideology that we should respect places like that. We should have a certain amount of respect to people and not to use too much violence against things. And people in Hong Kong were always embracing peaceful protesting and things like that, but not doing something like that. A lot of people were very shocked, including myself. It's very shocking to see what happened, breaking in breaking things and spraying down the building. And at the moment, I think a lot of people are very frustrated. It's not creating a good ambience in the city. Like, people are like becoming very angry towards each other. Some of the family members have different ideas. They were fighting, and some of them, they're not talking to their parents anymore, or friends. We're dropping out, unfriending friends on Facebook, and dropping out of WhatsApp groups because they have different ideas. And this is very sad.
I'm also, Andrew, I'm looking at your Twitter feed here, because not only were you reporting for Al Jazeera News, you were also documenting some of this on your Twitter feed. So I'm looking right there, back 2 days ago, Hong Kong protests right now, and you follow the protests from the outside of the Legislative Council building all the way through inside and then all the way through to the end. But let's start here, when you were outside the building. Did you feel that there was a sense of purpose with the protesters?
We've got to remember, this didn't come out of a vacuum. There'd been these big peaceful marches in June, 2 of them, both of them over 1 million people. There was a real sense among the protesters that they hadn't achieved their aims through these big marches, and that July the 1st, the anniversary of the handover from British colonial rule to China, was a climax for them, but also a climax for those they were trying to target. If they couldn't get their way on that day of all days, then when was it going to happen? And during the course of that day, and I probably spent 18 hours in total in the immediate vicinity of that LegCo, the legislative building right in the heart of Hong Kong, there was a growing sense of trepidation, anticipation as that day went on. It was a hot day, it was a dry day, and the protesters were out there for a long, long time before they finally broke into that building. And what was strange during the day was, for the vast majority of it, the police were nowhere to be seen. The protesters had that area entirely to themselves. They broke into the building. They then paused for a couple of hours, they did decide what to do before then going in. And it was about an hour after that the police came in, and then the confrontations began. But it was an incredible atmosphere out in the streets, one with an impending sense of, perhaps doom is too strong a word, but something big was going to happen. Everybody knew it. People had come prepared. You could see them in those shots there with their hard hats and their gas masks. Police had used tear gas and rubber bullets in a previous protest on the 12th of June, and the protesters were expecting them to do the same, or worse, this time around. So people knew it was going to come to a head. And when they finally got into that building, I think a lot of the violence you saw and the vandalism was about emotion just spilling over. These are young people who just wanted to really make their voices heard. But in Hong Kong, there's a lot of debate about whether they went too far.
Nixie, one of the most extraordinary pictures that I've seen, and if I may just share it with you, and then you go ahead, was for the Hong Kong Democracy Now! And they showed a picture of the protesters when they were inside the Legislative Council chambers. They drank some of the soft drinks, and then they put some money in the fridge to pay for them. These are not your regular kind of protesters, are they? They show something a little bit different here, even if you're mad about what they did. This is how they're behaving inside the chamber. It's not all graffiti. Your thoughts?
Yeah, well, it's social media, right? We see a lot of different photos from different angles. We see photos that were showing that they're protecting some of the historical pieces, art pieces within the building. But and then we also see other photos that they were actually got destroyed. And you see photos like that was showing that, well, they're paying for what's in the fridge, but then you also see that the whole fridge was cleared out. That amount of money doesn't really pay for what is actually inside. I mean, this time is very different from the previous protests that was happening, like including the Occupy Central. We see a lot of articulated promotion material. It's a very good marketing campaign, I can say. If you get access to a lot of the Chinese information that was flowing on Twitter, on Facebook, on WhatsApp groups, on Telegram, and things like that. A lot of the things that was untrue from both sides. I'm not only talking about like from the protester side, and also from the government sort of like pro-government side as well. Like people are making fake photos and fake news and this and that, and it's actually very frustrating. I mean, like it's.
But Nixie, to some extent that's true, but these were also not protesters that you sometimes get who were just exhibiting random violence. I mean, the only building that was attacked was that one. I went to dinner just a few hours ago in the building right next door, and it was completely, utterly untouched. So they were absolutely targeting that building and the symbolism that they feel that building shows, demonstrates.
As I would say is that as the
Nixie, hold tight for a moment. Just Nixie, I hear you. Just hold tight for a moment so that we can include Joshua in the conversation, because he's an important element of this conversation, obviously. Joshua, go ahead.
Yeah, I was the one being shot by tear gas outside of the Legislative Council 2 days ago. I would say that none of the violence exists during the action to storm into the building. Of course, people might have different understanding on the definition of violence, but the fact is none of the staff of the Legislative Council and police force have been physically assaulted by a protester. And the reason for protesters storm into the building is because the bill might be reactivated again in the Legislative Council. At the same time, I hope people could aware that Hong Kong people, more than 70% of them, urged the government to terminate the bill immediately, but government still ignored their voice. And the Legislative Council of Hong Kong, never all of the lawmakers are democratically elected.
All right, so let me share this with you, Nixie and Joshua. This is from Daki Kong on Twitter, and she says opinions among pro-democracy people might be divided, and you can hear that between our two guests here, as some insist on peaceful actions, but many, including myself, never blame the protesters, but understand they're in despair and suicidal after all the peaceful ways were attempted. Joshua, this is not hyperbole here. There have been protesters who have taken their own lives. Can you tell us what is really on the line here? Why would they go so far?
It's hard to expect that everyone around the world could agree on all the behaviors of protesters, especially during the storming action to the Legislative Council building. But why there is free activist suicide? Because they are downhearted and depressed and could not see the future of Hong Kong. I hope people could understand that 30% of the population of Hong Kong joined the rally last month to show the power of people, which means 2 out of 7 million people. Just imagine if in Washington or in New York or London, 30% of the population joined the rally within the same day, and government still ignore the voice. Even the chairperson of DAB, the parties that Ms. Lam belongs to, the chairperson also claimed that she agreed, the largest pro-Beijing party in Hong Kong agreed to withdraw this extradition
bill. So Joshua, I'm going to ask you to hold tight.
Joshua,
hold tight for a moment, because I'm just going to take baby steps through this, because you are deep, deep, deep into the politics of Hong Kong, and us as an international community, we're trying to stay up with you. But this idea, Andrew, of the protesters maybe disagreeing with each other is really important. And I know you spoke to protesters after Monday, just to get a sense of how were they feeling after they stormed the Legislative Council chambers, and that divided feeling amongst other people in Hong Kong about whether what they did was justified. I'm just going to play a little clip, and then, Andrew, you can pick up from the clip. Let's have a look.
Another older protester thinks that by not intervening earlier, police deliberately allowed violence, knowing it would reflect badly on the protesters. Even so, he too feels violence against property was justified.
My generation failed to do enough for the last 20 years. I've got children, I fear for them. There was violence, but it was against property, not people. We need to keep the protests up.
Andrew, go ahead.
Well, the protesters are split, to be honest. Most of those I've spoken to since say that the property damage was justified. They make this very important distinction between damaging property and damaging people. They said that they had a strategy. They were talking on social media beforehand. Do not hurt anybody. Even if the police come after us, make them the bad guys. We're not going to hurt anybody. And then they got into the building and they weren't being stopped. And I think some of them now feel that once they were inside, they went too far. Perhaps they should have broken the windows, yes, got into the legislative chamber itself, that symbolic room, and perhaps sat down, but not done as much damage as was done. Even some of those, frankly, who did some of that damage feel that their inner wildness perhaps got the better of them. And then there are these conspiracy theories that this was all intended by the government, that the government wanted them to get whipped up, wanted them to get in, because if they did what they did, then that would reflect badly on them. And in the battle of public opinion, which of course is all important in Hong Kong, they would lose some of that support. And certainly some of the people I've spoken to in Hong Kong do think they went too far and are now more suspicious, I suppose, of their aims and the sort of people that they would be campaigning alongside were they to pursue those same aims. Having said that, that's not a majority view by the protesters, and most of them say, even if we have lost at the margins some of the mainstream support, it was worth it. It was worth it partly for the symbolism of that building, but also they're not naive. They know that broadcasters, Al Jazeera, CNN, BBC, the New York Times, all of them would not be paying as much attention to the protests on Monday if it had just been another peaceful march. Remember, there'd already been two, and news channels weren't rolling for 5 hours, 6 hours, 7 hours in some cases on those marches, but they were rolling news on those protests when they turned violent.
Right.
And now that we've seen comments from world leaders all over the place talking about what happened in Hong Kong, they don't think they would have got that kind of attention had it been purely peaceful protest.
Right.
And at the same time, they say, no one got hurt.
Joshua is saying exactly. Joshua was talking about Carrie Lam, the chief executive of Hong Kong, talking about the extradition bill. This is what sparked up these renewed protests. I want you to hear Carrie Lam and what she said about this extradition bill a few days ago. Have a listen.
Well, it is not true to say that the government has not responded. We have not responded to every demand asked because of good reasons. Now, first of all, if the cause of the social tensions that we have seen is a bill to amend the Fugitive Offenders Ordinance, on the 15th of June, I have announced the suspension of the bill. And subsequently, we have explained and elaborated by suspending the bill at this point in time with no timetable and no plan to resume the debate of the bill in the Legislative Council.
I'm reading between the lines there, Joshua, and it sounds like Carrie Lam is saying this bill is just going to be allowed to die out. It's just going to die, but she doesn't want to say it. And I want to share this with you because we had two questions in for you specifically. So Gegem Pressing, she actually tweeted in Spanish, but we translated it. Everyone in the world is watching Hong Kong and the radical youth are learning from you. And that's you, Joshua. I have a question. What is the final objective of the demonstration? The resignation of Lam? Independence? I hope that the young people of Hong Kong get it. Joshua, go ahead.
I'm not the one seek for independence, but free election is a must for Hong Kong people.
Oh, we just lost Joshua there. Let me just go back to another question. We're trying to get him back before the end of the show. Joshua is a true legend, but I just want to ask him why their chief executive, Carrie Lam, is still in power. They need to change her. Does she have some influence and support in other foreign countries? Nixie, what's your take on Carrie Lam still being in power after all of this chaos that's happening in Hong Kong right now?
Well, my view is basically she created the mess. She should really deal with it herself. It's not very fair for her to step down right now and pass all this mess to the next person. And that is my view on whether she should step down or not. But then I want to go back to the earlier part of the show, saying that nobody were injured. That was the first building that was damaged. It's not the headquarters of the police building actually got attacked a few days before the 1st of July incident. So they were badly injured. There were spray paints, and the policemen were locked down with like metal gates and all sorts of materials in there. And they're not letting the police cannot even get out of their headquarters. And at the same day, earlier in the morning, before all the violence breaking into the Legislative Council building, a lot of people were actually attacking the policemen as well. We see a lot of the policemen were actually injured by corrosive water balloon was going into them. And
so, Nixie, does this change the way that you feel the public and your constituents are actually looking at the protesters? Do you feel this is influencing them?
We see a lot of people. Well, there's a lot of students that were very rational. I really respect them because they go into groups and they discuss and what they can do. As Andrew mentioned earlier, they break the things, and then they rest for about an hour, and then
I hear your point of view. You've hammered that home really well. One of the things that we're always curious about on the stream when we're covering protests is, what do the protesters want? This is what we gathered as we were listening to their demands in the Legislative Council chamber. We listed them, and I'm just really intrigued, Andrew. Just go ahead, just put them up there, control room, so that we can read them through. So we've got the full withdrawal of the extradition bill. We've talked about that. The retract the riot characterisation. So this is seeing these protesters as rioters rather than as peaceful protesters. They want to also have the release of the arrested protesters, investigate police brutality, although Nixie will maybe not agree with that one, and the resignation of Carrie Lam. We've had tweets in about that. Andrew, was it very clear as you were covering the protests what the protesters want? Were they all as one, working together?
Well, those demands, if you like, that you just put up on the screen are what they were asking for on the day, but they were also privately, in a sense, going further, and they were saying these are symbolic things that we want to achieve at this stage, but this movement has got legs, it's got momentum. Remember, in Hong Kong, 5 years ago now, the so-called umbrella movement, the Occupy movement, which called for much broader democratic reform in Hong Kong, and there were months of sit-ins around the same central area of Hong Kong that frankly didn't achieve very much. Essentially, they ended up fizzling out. What the protesters now feel is that they have, despite what they say, some of them publicly, they have achieved something. These extradition proposals were going full steam ahead, and now they've been taken off the table. And to be honest, it's almost a matter of semantics, this difference between those proposals expiring, as Carrie Lam says they will, next summer, about a year from now, and being formally withdrawn. In all honesty, that kind of could amount to the same thing. But for the protesters, they want the symbolic victory of a formal withdrawal. But of course, that's the same reason Carrie Lam, the chief executive, isn't going to give them that formal withdrawal, because that would be a formal defeat. But the protesters have achieved something. They've got these extradition proposals taken off the table, if not for good, then certainly for the long term. But they feel like they're on a roll. And a lot of the other demands, really, are to do with the previous protest, the investigation of police brutality, for example, the characterisation of the previous protests as a protest and not a riot. Riot carries a significant prison term. If you're accused of being a rioter and prosecuted and go to prison for that, well, that's a 10-year prison term. That's why the protesters don't like that characterisation. But those relate to the protests themselves. Political demands, it's the extradition bill, but then that's a sort of foot in the door for broader democratic reforms. All
right, the Skype gods were with us. We got Joshua back, which is really good. Just in time to address something that Yuen Chan, who is a senior lecturer at the City University of London, wanted to bring up to you, Joshua. And she was talking about the way that the protesters may have different viewpoints, and maybe the authorities in Hong Kong are using that to break up the movement. Have a listen to what Yuen had to say.
So far, I think this strategy is failing because, on the whole, a lot of Hong Kongers are supporting these young people, even if they don't condone all of their actions. So I think going forward, the most important thing is going to be how to preserve the unity of the movement.
Joshua, how do you feel the movement is doing right now? Is it in a healthy state or not? Just
Beijing love to split the movement and to erode on the solidarity of Hong Kongers. We are not satisfied on suspension of the bill because Hong Kong government could easily reactivate the bill inside the Legislative Council, the building being stormed by protesters 2 days ago. That's the reason for youngsters to take action. I understand it's hard for everyone to accept all the behaviors of protesters.
So Joshua, I hear that, and also I want to point people to your Twitter feed because you clarify, you put into context what it is that you did and why you did it. Let me just show people here so they can actually look at it. And you say, "Dear world, I want to say a few words about what happened yesterday." But Joshua, in a word, because people can go and look at that thread, because it's very impressive. In a word, what is the healthy state, or what is the state of the movement in Hong Kong?
The state of movement is we will continue with our spirit and determination. Of course, the long-term goal is to fight for free election, but in the short run, we will still have peaceful action to ask to withdraw the bill.
Thank you so much for joining us, Nixie Lam, and also Andrew Thomas as well. We appreciate you being with us. More online at AJ Stream. Thanks for watching, everybody.